The sun rose that morning as it always did, I think. Perhaps its light was a bit more orange, perhaps the air a bit thicker. But no one noticed. The baker Marcus Vesonius Primus, or Hus Marcus, as he was known among the people, opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the crack in the ceiling of his room. It was a small crack, a thin curve that had been there for years. Looking at this crack was a habit, the kind you do without thinking. Maybe it gave him a kind of reassurance. Or maybe it was just there, and he just looked at it. He got out of bed, his knees creaking slightly. A neighbor once laughed and told him, "We're growing old together, Marcus." He was 46, maybe 40. The exact age doesn't really matter. What mattered was that this morning seemed no different from any other. He stood for a moment, watching the morning light filter through the window, touching the mosaic fish on the floor, blue and white stones, commissioned by his father years ago. In his childhood, these fish seemed real, and at night, he would dream of them swimming. Now, they were just faded ornaments, but still, he looked at them every morning. He put on his tunic. The woolen fabric was slightly itchy, but he was used to it. His wife had sewn it for him, but she was gone now, lost to a winter illness years ago. Since then, Marcus had lived alone, in his small room above the bakery. Downstairs was his work. Upstairs, his bed, a table, a chair, and the view of Mount Vesuvius from his window. Vesuvius? I remember him looking at the mountain that morning, as he did every morning. It was there, large, silent, covered with green. Vineyards and olive trees stretched along its slopes. Sometimes clouds would wrap around its summit, but that morning, the sky was clear, I think. Or maybe it was slightly cloudy. I don't remember exactly, but the mountain was there, in its usual place, completely still. As Marcus descended the wooden stairs, the steps creaked beneath him. The bakery was already warming up. His apprentice, a young boy named Quintus, had come in the early hours to light the wood fire. Quintus was about 13 or 14, a quiet boy who did his work well. Marcus trusted him. Inside the bakery, it was hot. The brick walls were slowly turning red, the embers glowing brightly in the hearth. Marcus approached the fire and warmed his hands. Outside it was still cool, but in here, it was always warm. The same warmth, the same smell for years. Flour, yeast, and burnt wood, all mixed together. Preparing the dough was a long process. Flour, water, salt, a little olive oil. He kneaded each piece with his hands, a ritual that could take hours. Slowly, the dough would take shape, soften, and rise. Marcus's hands were strong and rough from years of work, his fingers thick, his nails short. He never wore jewelry. It was impractical for making dough. I don't remember how many loaves he made that morning, but I think it must have been 12 or 15. Maybe more. It was enough for the daily sales. Pompeii was a small city, but it was lively. People gathered in the forum. Shops opened, and merchants called out. Marcus's bakery was near the forum, on Via dell'Abbondanza. He had regular customers, familiar faces he saw every morning. Old women came for fresh bread. Children ran up, handing over a few coins for a small loaf. When the dough went into the oven, it stayed there for a precise amount of time. Marcus was skilled at timing. He never took the bread out too early, nor too late. Just right. The crust lightly browned, the inside soft. People loved his bread for that reason, but Marcus was perhaps unaware of this, or he just didn't care. He simply did his job. As the morning progressed, a crowd gathered in front of the bakery. Marcus and Quintus arranged the hot, fragrant bread on the counter. Some loaves were sold immediately, while others would remain until evening. But it didn't matter. The bread would always be sold eventually. Towards noon, the weather had warmed up. The sun was high, and the streets were more crowded. Marcus took a break, stepping out into the small courtyard behind the bakery. He drew cold water from the well and washed his face, the water running down his hands and arms. His body was covered in sweat and flour dust, but it was a familiar comfort. In the corner of the courtyard stood a small fig tree. Sometimes he would pick a fig from its branches and chew it slowly. Did he do that on this day? I don't know, but I think he did, because at noon, he usually did. The fig was sweet, and the taste would spread in his mouth. In the afternoon, the bakery grew quieter. Marcus would occasionally check the oven, watching the embers. Quintus would clean up and arrange the flour sacks. Everything was in its routine. The same every day. Sometimes Marcus would step outside and walk along the Via della Bandenza. He would greet his neighbors. The shop next door belonged to a tailor, an old man who talked a lot. I don't remember his name. Marcus would usually just listen, not responding much. A little further on was a wine shop, where he sometimes bought cheap wine to drink alone in the evenings. That day, towards evening can't say exactly what time it was, but the sun had lowered. Marcus closed the bakery. The last loaves had been sold, and the embers had slowly died down. Quintus had gone home. Marcus sat for a while on the stool behind the counter, his hands on his knees, his eyes half. Maybe he was tired, or maybe he was just resting. The streets were slowly beginning to empty. The evening cool was descending on Pompeii. From far away, from the direction of the amphitheater, sounds were coming. Maybe there was a show that evening, but Marcus wasn't interested. He just sat, silently. After a while, he went upstairs to his room. He opened the window and looked outside. Mount Vesuvius was there again, its silhouette indistinct in the dim light. The sky was reddish, the clouds a shade of pink. Marcus looked at this view for some time. I can't know what he was thinking. Maybe he wasn't thinking anything. Maybe he was just looking. I don't remember what he ate that evening. Maybe some bread, some cheese, maybe olives. He ate alone, as always. A small oil lamp burned on the table, its flame dancing in the air, casting moving shadows on the wall. After his meal, he stood at the window for a while longer. Outside, it was now dark. The streets were silent, with only the sound of a dog barking in the distance. Marcus lay down in bed. He didn't cover himself with a blanket. The air was still warm. He looked at the ceiling crack again. That crack was still there, a faint shadow in the darkness. I don't know when he fell asleep, but he slept, because everyone sleeps eventually. And that night, Pompeii also slept, along with all its houses, streets, and people. Quietly, unaware of anything. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing for more tales from the past. See you next time. But during the night, deep down, in places no one could hear, something was happening. Inside Vesuvius, magma was boiling, slowly rising. Pressure was increasing. Rock layers were tensing. But these were silent processes. No one knew. Only the mountain knew. And the mountain was waiting. Marcus woke up early in the morning, or thought he woke up, but actually, he wasn't sure. Sometimes, he would wake up in the middle of the night, then sleep again. That night might have been the same. It was still dark in the room. No sound was coming from outside. There was only the sound of his own breathing, slow and regular. I think he slept again, but it wasn't a deep sleep. It was superficial, going back and forth between dream and reality. I don't remember what he saw in his dreams. Maybe he saw old days. Maybe his wife. Maybe he saw nothing. Dreams are so uncertain. They disappear when morning comes. When morning came again, that is, real morning. When the sun rose, Marcus slowly opened his eyes. There was a strange light in the room. This light was not orange. It was more reddish, as if the sun had risen from a different angle. Marcus noticed this, but didn't dwell on it. Sometimes the weather would be like this. Clouds would change the light. He got out of bed again. His knees creaked again. He went to the window, looked outside. The street was as usual, but people hadn't come out yet. The weather must have been earlier. Maybe Marcus woke up unusually early that morning. I don't know. He looked at Mount Vesuvius. The mountain was there, but there was something at its summit, like a light mist, or like smoke. Marcus saw this, but didn't pay much attention. Sometimes there would be morning mists on the mountains, especially at the end of summer. This was considered normal. He went downstairs, Tote Bakiri. The apprentice, Quintus, hadn't come yet. Marcus lit the fire on his own, arranged the wood. The flames slowly grew. The embers began to glow. Everything was as usual. He started kneading the dough, his hands working with mechanical movements. Flour, water, salt, mix, knead, wait. But something was different that morning. Marcus was feeling this, but didn't know exactly what it was. Maybe the smell in the air was a bit different. Maybe there was a sulfur smell. Very faint, almost imperceptible. Or maybe he was just imagining it. Quintus came a while later. The boy was silent as usual, but there was a strange expression on his face. Marcus asked him, "Did something happen?" Quintus shook his head. "No, sir. Just the weather outside is a bit strange." Marcus went outside, looked at the street. The sky was blue as usual, but there was a strange color on the horizon. A mixture of gray and crimson. The sun hadn't risen completely yet, or it was behind the clouds. Marcus shrugged. "Maybe the weather will change," he said. Quintus said nothing. The loaves went into the oven. Marcus knew the timing, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It was different for each loaf. But that morning, he was a bit uneasy inside. An uneasiness he didn't know, as if he had forgotten something, but couldn't remember what it was. Towards noon, customers began to come, but few came, fewer than normal. Marcus noticed this, but didn't comment. Maybe there was a festival. Maybe people had gathered in the forum. Sometimes it would be like this, but the streets were also empty, emptier than usual. A woman came. She was old. She came every day. "Marcus," she said, "did you look at the mountain?" Marcus said his head. "What happened to the mountain?" The woman pointed her finger towards Vesuvius. "Look there." Marcus went outside, looked. Smoke was rising from the summit of the mountain. This smoke was not white. It was more grayish, thick. It was rising towards the sky, slowly spreading. Marcus saw this, but didn't understand what it was. Maybe it was a fire. Maybe someone had lit a fire on the slope of the mountain. "It must be a fire," he said to the woman. The woman nodded, but wasn't convinced. "I don't know, Marcus. This is a strange thing." Then she took her bread, left. Marcus returned to the bakery, but the uneasiness had increased inside him. Quintus wasn't comfortable either. It was obvious. The boy would occasionally go outside, look at the sky. Marcus didn't say anything to him, because he was doing the same thing. In the afternoon, the smoke became even thicker. Now, it could be seen from many places in Pompeii. People had come out into the streets, were looking at the sky. Some were worried, some were curious. No one knew exactly what was happening. Mount Vesuvius stood there, but the smoke coming from its summit was now shadowing the sky. Marcus closed the bakery early that afternoon. The loaves weren't finished yet, but somehow he couldn't continue. He said to Quintus, "Go home." The boy hesitated. "But sir..." Marcus waved his hand. "Go. We'll continue tomorrow." Quintus left. Marcus closed the door of the bakery, went inside. But he didn't go upstairs. He just sat behind the counter. He clasped his hands together, waited silently. He didn't know what he was waiting for. But outside the streets were noisy now. People were talking, shouting. Some were running to their homes. Some were going towards the forum. Marcus didn't join any of them. He just sat, waited. Evening came, but the sky didn't darken. It rather turned gray. Smoke clouds had remained suspended above the city. The sun had disappeared, but there was still light, a dim light. Marcus went to the window, looked outside. Vesuvius was no longer visible. Smoke had covered everything. And then, right at that moment, I don't know what time it was. Maybe 6 in the evening. Maybe savannah sound was heard. A loud sound coming from very far away. Like thunder, but deeper, longer. Marcus felt vibration in his chest. The ground shook slightly. Outside, people screamed. Marcus looked out the window. People were running, in panic. But Marcus didn't move. He just stood there, at the window, looking. The second sound was more powerful. This time, the ground shook seriously. Cracks opened in the walls. Marcus staggered backwards, tried to hold on to something but couldn't. He fell to the ground. A pot hanging on the wall fell, broke. Earthen vessels rolled. Marcus tried to get up. His knees were trembling. He looked out the window again. The sky was now completely red. The smoke cloud now resembled a giant mushroom, rising to the depths of the sky. And under that cloud, at the summit of Vesuvius, A red light was shining. Lava and molten rock. It was gushing into the sky. Marcus saw these things, but didn't fully understand, because such a thing had never happened, had never been seen. Maybe it had happened centuries ago, but no one remembered. Something no one knew was happening now. The third explosion was even more powerful. The sound was so loud that Marcus's ears rang. The ground shook so much that it was impossible to stand. He fell to the ground again. Everything around him was shaking. Walls were cracking. Ceiling dust was falling. And then things started falling from the sky. First, they were stone fragments. Small, black, light. They were raining from the sky like rain. They were falling on roofs, on streets. Some were hot, impossible to touch. Some were light, flying in the wind. These were volcanic stones, formed by magma gushing into the air and solidifying pumice stones. Marcus quickly closed the window, but it was too late. Stones had entered the room, scattered on the floor. Some were still hot, leaving marks on the ground. Outside, the sounds increased even more. Screams, running sounds, sounds of things falling over. Marcus ran to the door, wanted to go outside, but the street was chaos. People were running in every direction, bumping into each other. Some had picked up their children. Some were trying to carry their belongings. Stones continued to rain from the sky, more frequent, faster. Marcus went out into the street but didn't know where to go. The Forum, the harbor, the other side of the mountain. No one knew. Everyone was just running, but they didn't know where to run. A woman grabbed Marcus's arm. What'll happen now? Shouted. Marcus couldn't even look at her, because he was asking himself the same question. The woman let go of his arm, ran. Marcus returned to the bakery. Maybe he was safe there. Maybe it was better than being outside. I went inside, closed the door. But the walls continued to shake. Stones were falling from the ceilings, and the rain from the sky never stopped. Oh, pass. I don't know how long, because time had lost its importance. Maybe an hour, maybe 3. The sky was completely dark, but a red light glowed ominously. The reflection of lava on the clouds. The streets of Pompeii were filled with stones, piling up to knee-height in some places. I'm Marcus, a baker, and I'm standing in the middle of what used to be my shop, listening to the sounds outside. The screaming has lessened, but it hasn't stopped completely. Every now and then, a sharp, desperate voice rises, then fades away again. I can't help but wonder if Quintus made it home safely. My apprentice. He lives on the other side of the city, near the Nuceria gate. It's a long way to go in this chaos. The walls of my bakery groan under the weight of the falling pumice stones. Small fragments find their way through gaps in the roof, scattering across the floor where I needed dough just this morning. It feels like a lifetime ago now. That quiet routine. The crack of eggs, the warmth of the oven, the simple rhythm of work. I move slowly towards the back, to the small storage room where I keep the flour sacks. The air is thick with dust, with particles of ash mixing with the pumice. Each breath feels heavy, coating my throat. I find an old cloth, dampen it with the last of the water from a clay jug, and tie it around my face. It helps a little. Through the small window, I can see my neighbor's house. Old Lucius, the fuller. He works with cloth, cleaning garments for wealthy Romans. I never liked the sharp smell that came from his workshop, but now I would welcome it. Anything familiar, anything from the ordinary life we've lost. Is he still in his house? Or did they flee? The ground shakes again, not violently, but a constant, unsettling tremor, like the earth itself is restless. I brace myself against the wall, feeling the vibrations travel through the stone and into my bones. I'm a baker, not a scholar. I don't understand why the mountain is so angry, why it's destroying everything. I only know that it is, and I can do nothing to stop it. Time continues its strange, elastic quality. Minutes feel like hours. I find myself thinking about my wife, Julia. She died 7 winters ago, during the fever that swept through the city. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand as it grew cold. I thought then that nothing could be worse than that loss. But this is different. This isn't a slow fading. This is the world ending in fire and stone. I wonder, Will she be waiting for me in whatever place the dead inhabit? The priests speak of the underworld, of Pluto's realm. I was never very religious. My faith has always been a practical thing, a matter of custom. But now, standing in my crumbling bakery with the sky raining destruction, I find myself hoping those priests were right. A loud crash snaps me back to the present. Part of the roof in the front room has given way. Stones are tumbling onto the counter where customers stood this morning, selecting their bread, exchanging gossip. The beautiful counter my father built, its stone worn smooth by years of use. I carefully make my way around the debris and climb the stairs to my room. Each step is uncertain. The stairs are intact, but they tremble with each footfall. My legs feel weak, from fear or exhaustion. I can't tell. The room upstairs is chaos. The window I left open is completely blocked by pumice stones. The bed is covered in a layer of black and gray fragments. The oil lamp is shattered on the floor, and there, on the ceiling, barely visible in the dim light, is the crack. My crack. The one I've looked at every morning for years. I sit on the edge of the bed, brushing aside some of the stones. They're surprisingly light, these rocks from the sky. Porous. I'll pick one up. It's still faintly warm. A piece of the mountain, I think. A piece of Vesuvius, come to visit my bedroom. Outside, the noise has changed. The screaming has mostly stopped. Instead, there's a low, constant roar, like a great beast breathing. And beneath it, another sound, a sound like heavy rain. Denser. I stand up, go to the window, and try to see through the gaps between the piled stones. What I see makes my breath catch. The pumice has stopped falling. In its place, something else is descending. A gray cloud, thick and heavy, rolling down the streets like a living thing. It moves with purpose, filling every space, covering everything. Ash. I've seen ash before, from fires, from the baths, but never like this. It falls steadily, relentlessly. I watch it cover the street below, watch it rise against the walls of the buildings across the way. Inch by inch, it climbs higher. A movement catches my eye, a figure in the street, stumbling through the rising ash. I can't tell who it is. The figure takes a few more steps, then falls, disappears into the gray. They don't get up again. I turn away from the window. My heart is beating too fast. I sit back down on the bed, place my hands on my knees, trying to steady myself. So this is how it ends. Not in dramatic fire, not in a heroic escape. Just a slow burial. A city covered, hidden, forgotten. I think about the bread I made this morning. 12 loaves. 15. I can't remember. Perfect loaves, with golden crusts and soft centers. All of them buried now in the ruble of my bakery. My last work. My final contribution to the city that has been my home for 47 years. The ash continues to fall. Primera caene. Hear it a soft, hissing sound, like sand in an hourglass, measuring out the final moments. The room is getting darker, the dim red glow from outside fading. I lie back on the bed, careful to find a spot not too heavily covered with pumice. The ceiling crack is almost invisible now. But I know it's there. I can trace its familiar path in my mind. My breathing is becoming more difficult. Each breath brings more ash into my lungs. Despite the cloth over my face, it settles in my chest, heavy and irritating. I cough, but it only makes it worse. I hope Quintus escaped. The boy is young, fast. Maybe he made it to the gates before the ash came. Maybe he's safe now, looking back at the cloud that covers his city. I hope so. He deserves a life, deserves the years I'll never see. The darkness is nearly complete, just the faintest red glow, filtered through layers of ash and stone. I close my eyes. It makes no difference. My thoughts begin to drift. Julia's face appears, young and smiling. My father, showing me how to knead dough. Quintus, just this morning, lighting the fire. The old woman who bought bread every day. Lucius the fuller, complaining about prices. Then, nothing. Then everything. Then nothing again. The ceiling groans. Ash is accumulating on the roof now, adding its weight to the damaged structure. How much more can it bear? I don't move. I lie still, hands at my sides, breathing slowly, each breath a little harder than the last. Each breath a little shallower. I think I hear voices, distant and muffled. Or maybe it's just the wind, moving through the buried streets. The darkness is absolute. The air is more ash than oxygen. My chest hurts with each breath. But strangely, I feel calm. This is happening. The mountain has decided. I lived a simple life. A good life, I think. I baked bread. I loved my wife. I was kind to my apprentice. What more could be asked? The weight on my chest is increasing, not just from my lungs, but unactual physical weight. Ash is finding its way into the room now, accumulating, rising. My last thought, before thought itself becomes too difficult, is of the crack in the ceiling. That small, familiar imperfection. I hope it survives. I hope that someday, someone will find it and wonder about the man who slept beneath it. Then even that thought fades, and then there was only breathing. Slow, labored breathing. In, out. In, out. Each cycle a little more difficult than the last. Each pause between breaths a little longer. Marcus's body knew what his mind no longer fully grasped. That this was ending. That the mechanism of life, the simple exchange of air that had sustained him for 46 or 47 years, was failing. The ash had won. The mountain had won. Vesuvius, which had stood silent and green on the horizon for all his life, had finally spoken. The room was silent now, except for that breathing. The sounds from outside had stopped. No more screaming, no more running feet, no more falling stones. Just a soft, relentless accumulation of ash. Like snow, Marcus thought dimly. Like the snow that had fallen once when he was a child, a rare occurrence in Pompeii. He had played in it, made shapes with his hands. His mother had called him inside before he caught cold. His mother. He hadn't thought of her in years. She had been a small woman, always moving, always working. She had taught him to bake, actually, before his father had taken over the lessons. The feel of dough, she had said. You have to learn the feel. Every batch is slightly different. The weather affects it. The quality of the flour. The temperature of the water. You can't just follow rules. You have to feel it. He wondered if she had felt this. At the end, she had died in her sleep, they said. Peacefully. Gone to bed one evening and simply not woken up. Marcus had envied her that taste of Italiano now. He understood. Perhaps it had been like this for her too. A slow fading. A gentle diminishment. Perhaps dying was always like this, whether sudden or slow. Letting go. The pain in his chest had dulled to a distant ache. Everything was distant now. His body felt far away, as if he was observing it from somewhere else. The bed beneath him, the ash covering him. The darkness around him, all of it seemed less immediate, less important. There was a moment, just a moment, where he thought he felt warmth. Not the harsh heat of the falling stones, but a gentle warmth. Like sunlight through a window, like Julia's hand in his, like the first loaves of bread coming out of the oven on a winter morning. His breathing slowed further. The pauses grew longer. Somewhere, beneath meters of ash and pumice, the city of Pompeii lay in ruins. The forum where people had gathered just that morning. The amphitheater where gladiators had fought. The temples where offerings had been made. The houses where families had lived and loved and argued and laughed. All of it buried. All of it silent. In his bakery, the oven had long since gone cold. The fire that Quintus had lit that morning, that Marcus had tended throughout the day, had been smothered by falling debris. The flour sacks were buried. The kneading table was covered. The beautiful stone counter was invisible beneath layers of volcanic material. And upstairs, in the small room with the mosaic fish, in the crack in the ceiling, Marcus Vesonius Primus took his last breath. It was not dramatic. There was no struggle, no final gasp, just a slight movement of his chest, a small exhalation, and then stillness. The ash continued to fall, covering him completely, gently, almost tenderly. It settled over his body, preserving the position in which he lay, hands at his sides, head slightly tilted. Elias closed. The hours passed. Then days. The ashfall continued for hours more, then gradually slowed, then stopped. The clouds that had covered the sun began to disperse. Light returned to the region, though not to Pompeii. Pompeii remained in darkness, buried beneath 6 meters of volcanic material. The survivors, those who had fled to Nuceria, or Stabia, or across the bay to Neapolis, did not return. There was nothing to return to. Where their city had stood, there was now only a gray wasteland. Still warm, still steaming. Dangerous uninhabitable. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The emperor sent officials to assess the damage, to see what could be salvaged. They found nothing. Pompeii was gone. Herculaneum was gone. Stabia was gone. The mountain had devoured them all. The survivors told their stories. About the darkness at noon, about the rain of fire, about the cloud that had rushed down from the mountain, killing everything in its path. The story spread throughout the empire, carried by merchants and soldiers and travelers. The destruction of Pompeii became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the power of the gods, or of nature, or of fate. But Marcus's story was not told, because no one knew Marcus's story. Quintus, if he had survived, might have remembered his master, the quiet baker who had taught him the trade. But Quintus was young, and the young forget, and life goes on. The years passed, then decades, then centuries. The location of Pompeii was forgotten. The landscape changed. Vegetation grew over the buried city. Farmers planted crops in the rich volcanic soil, not knowing what lay beneath their fields. Villages were built, then abandoned, then built again. And beneath it all, Marcus slept. In 1748, nearly 1700 years after that August day, a farmer digging in his field struck something hard. Stone. Carved stone. He called others, and they dug further, uncovering walls, mosaics, paintings. They had found something, but they didn't know what. Not at first. The excavations began slowly, then accelerated. Room after room was uncovered. Street after street, an anti-recidi, preserved beneath the ash. The city of Pompeii, lost and found. They found the Forum, the amphitheater, the temples, the houses with their beautiful frescoes and intricate mosaics. They found the bodies too, or rather, the spaces where bodies had been. The ash had hardened around the victims, and when the organic matter decayed, it left cavities, perfect molds of their final moments. In 1863, archaeologists working on the Via dell'Abbondanza uncovered a bakery. It was well preserved, the oven still intact, the stone counter still standing. They found millstones for grinding grain. They found carbonized loaves of bread, still in the oven after all those centuries. 81 loaves, perfectly preserved by the ash. And upstairs, in a small room with mosaics of fish on the floor, they found a cavity in the ash. A human-shaped cavity. They poured plaster into it, let it harden, then carefully removed the surrounding material. What emerged was the form of a man, lying on his back, hands at his sides, face peaceful. The plaster captured every detail. The folds of his tunic, the position of his fingers, the shape of his body. They couldn't know his name. The records, if any had existed, were long since lost. They called him simply the Baker of Pompeii, one of hundreds of victims they would eventually recover, one of thousands who had died that day. But if they had known to look more carefully at the ceiling above where he lay, they might have noticed something. A small crack in the plaster, running in a thin curve across the surface. A crack that had been there for years before the eruption, and remained thereafter. A crack that had greeted a man named Marcus every morning of his adult life. The excavations continued. More streets uncovered, more houses revealed. More stories told, or half-told, or guessed at, from the fragments that remained. Tourists came to see the lost city. Scholars came to study it. Artists came to paint it. Writers came to imagine it. Pompeii, buried for 17 centuries, was alive again in memory, in imagination, in history. And in his small room above the bakery, the plaster cast of Marcus was eventually moved to a museum, where visitors would pass by, would pause, would look at the figure of a man who had died so long ago. Some would feel sadness. Some would feel awe. Some would simply take a photograph and move on. But the crack in the ceiling remained, still there in the excavated room, visible to anyone who thought to look up. A small imperfection, a minor flaw, a daily constant in one man's ordinary life. The city of Pompeii stands now as it stood for over 2 centuries since its rediscovery. A ghost city, a memorial, a warning, a wonder. People walk its streets every day, thousands of them, marveling at the preservation, imagining the lives that were lived there. And Mount Vesuvius stands above it all, green and silent once more. Dormant, they say. Not dead. Never dead. Who's sleeping as Marcus sleeps, as Pompeii sleeps, waiting. But that is a concern for another day, for other people, for a future that none of us can know. For now, there is only the silence, the preserved streets, the empty houses, the plaster casts of the dead, and somewhere in a museum, the figure of a baker, hands at his sides, face, peaceful. Marcus Vesonius Primus, or just Marcus, as he was known among the people, sleeping his long sleep, dreaming, perhaps, of bread and morning light and ceiling cracks and all the small, ordinary things that make up a life. Sleeping peacefully, forever. But even forever is not quite the end, is it? Because stories don't end. Not really. They continue in the minds of those who hear them, who read them, who stand in excavated rooms and wonder about the people who lived there. A school child visits Pompeii on a class trip. She is bored at first, tired of walking, tired of listening to the guide. But then she sees the bakery, the oven, the stone counter, the millstones, and something shifts in her mind. Someone made bread here, she thinks. Someone worked here every day. Someone's hands touched these stones. She asked the guide about the baker. The guide doesn't know much, just that a body was found upstairs. Just that he probably died quickly. They all did, from the ash, from the heat. But the girl keeps thinking about it. That night, in her hotel room, she can't sleep. She imagines getting up each morning, going downstairs, lighting the fire, kneading the dough. Years later, she becomes a historian, specializes in daily life in ancient Rome, writes papers about bread production, about bakery workers, about the ordinary people who made the extraordinary city function. She never forgets that bakery on the Via dell'Abbondanza, never forgets the man who might have worked there. A novelist visits Pompeii. He walks through the streets alone, early in the morning before the crowds arrive. He stands in the baker's room, looks at the space where the body was found. He notices the crack in the ceiling, wonders if the baker noticed it too, wonders what else the baker saw, thought, felt in those final hours. He writes a book. It's not about Pompeii. Not exactly. It's about a man in a modern city, going through his routines, unaware that everything is about to change. But the ghost of Marcus is in every page. The quiet acceptance, the small rituals, the unexpected end. An artist comes. She photographs the crack in the ceiling. Just the crack. Nothing else. The photograph hangs in a gallery in Rome. People pause before it, puzzled. What are they looking at? Why is this significant? But some understand. Some see what she saw. The persistence of small things. The survival of imperfection. The crack that outlived the man who looked at it every morning. And the excavations continue, even now. New sections of Pompeii are still being uncovered. New technologies allow archaeologists to see things that were invisible before. They can analyze the carbonized bread, determine what grains were used. They can study bone fragments, understand what diseases people suffered from. They can reconstruct faces from skulls, give features to the nameless dead. Perhaps someday they will do this for Marcus. Perhaps they will create a digital reconstruction of his face. Blue eyes or brown. A beard or clean-shaven. A kind face. Certainly. A tired face. A face that woke each morning to the same ceiling crack and found comfort in that consistency. The bakery itself has been partially reconstructed. The roof replaced. The walls stabilized. Visitors can walk through it now, can stand where customers once stood, can peer into the oven where bread baked on that final morning. Some reach out to touch the counter, then pull back, remembering that touching is not allowed. But the impulse is there. To connect, to reach across 2,000 years and touch the same stone that Marcus touched. In universities around the world, students study Pompeii. They write dissertations on urban planning, on social structure, on economics and trade. They analyze graffiti, pottery fragments, wall paintings. They build careers on the ruins of this one city, this one day, this one catastrophe. And sometimes, in the footnotes of academic papers, in the catalogs of museum collections, in the guidebooks that tourists carry, there appears a reference. The baker of Pompeii, Via della Bondans, 1st century AD. Identity unknown. One of approximately 1,500 victims recovered from the city. One of 1,500, but also one. Just one. A single person with a single life, with preferences and habits and memories and hopes, with creaking knees, and a dead wife, and a trusted apprentice, and a view of a mountain from his window. Marcus, the mountain still, stands Vesuvius. It has erupted several times since that August day in 79 AD and 1631, killing 4,000 people. In 1906, killing over 100. Small eruptions in 1913, in 1926, in 1944, and then silence. Dormancy. But not death. Never death. Scientists monitor it constantly now. Seismographs measure every tremor. Gas emissions are analyzed. Evacuation plans are prepared. Because 3 million people live in the shadow of Vesuvius. 3 million people who wake each morning, go to work, make their bread or whatever they make, and try not to think about the mountain. But some do think about it. Some look up at that green slope and remember Pompeii. Remember that the earth is not stable, not safe, not permanent. That everything we build, everything we love, everything we are, exists at the mercy of forces we cannot control. And yet they stay. They live their lives. They raise their children. They plant their gardens. They bake their bread. Because what else is there to do? We are all, in the end, living in the shadow of some threat we cannot prevent, cannot escape. All we can do is live, wake each morning, look at our own ceiling cracks, go about our routines, hope for another day. Marcus understood this, I think. Not consciously, perhaps. He wasn't a philosopher. He was a baker. But in his bones, in his daily return to the same work, the same rhythms, there was an understanding that life is precious because it is fragile. That routine is comfort because tomorrow is uncertain. That the crack in the ceiling matters because it is there, and you are there to see it, and that is enough. The museum where his cast resides closes at 7 each evening. The guards walk through, checking the rooms, ushering out the last visitors. The lights are dimmed. The building settles into silence, and Marcus lies there in his glass case, in the position he died in, hands at his sides, forever 46, or 47 years old, forever on the edge of sleep. Does he dream, in whatever way plaster can dream? Does some echo of consciousness linger in the shape of his form? Do the atoms that once composed his body, now scattered across the world, recycled into new forms, new lives, carry some memory of having been Marcused? These are questions without answers. Perhaps the wrong questions entirely. The right question might be simpler. Did he live? Yes. Did he matter? To Quintus, perhaps. To Duelia, certainly. To his customers, in the small way that the baker matters to those who buy his bread. To us, now, standing in his room, looking at his ceiling crack, wondering about his life. Yes. He mattered a baker in Pompeii, who rose each morning, who made his bread, who looked at a crack in his ceiling, who died when the mountain spoke, and who sleeps now, peacefully, in memory, in history, in the stories we tell about him, in the silence between the words, in the spaces we leave for imagination, in the cracks in our own ceilings, in the ordinary moments we don't think to treasure until they're gone. Sleeping. Forever sleeping. While the world goes on, while the tourists come and go, while the mountain watches, while time passes, while we, who are also temporary, who are also fragile, who are also living on borrowed time in the shadow of our own Vesuvius, whatever form it takes, while we remember and forget, and remember again. Good night, Marcus. Sleep well. We will keep watch for you. We will tell your story. We will remember the baker of Pompeii, who was a person who had a name, who lived, rest, now rest. Rest. And then there was only breathing. Slow, labored breathing. In, out. Each cycle a little more difficult than the last. Each pause between breaths a little longer. Marcus's body knew what his mind no longer fully grasped. That this was ending. That the mechanism of life, the simple exchange of air that had sustained him for 46 or 47 years, was failing. The ash had won. The mountain had won. Vesuvius, which had stood silent and green on the horizon for all his life, had finally spoken. The room was silent now, except for that breathing. The sounds from outside had stopped. No more screaming, no more running feet, no more falling stones. Just soft, relentless accumulation of ash. Like snow, Marcus thought dimly, like the snow that had fallen once when he was a child. A rare occurrence in Pompeii. He had played in it, made shapes with his hands. His mother had called him inside before he caught cold. His mother, he hadn't thought of her in years. She had been a small woman, always mobbing, always working. She had taught him to bake, actually, before his father had taken over the lessons. The feel of dough, she had said. You have to learn the feel. Every batch is slightly different. The weather affects it, the quality of the flour, the temperature of the water. You can't just follow rules. You have to feel it. He wondered if she had felt this. At the end, she had died in her sleep, they said. Se fully. Gone to bed one evening and simply not woken up. Marcus had envied her that. Taste of Italiana. Now he understood. Perhaps it had been like this for her too. A slow fading, a gentle diminishment. Perhaps dying was always like this, whether sudden or slow. A letting go. The pain in his chest had dulled to a distant ache. Everything was distant now. His body felt far away, as if he was observing it from somewhere else. The bed beneath him, the ash covering him, the darkness around him, all of it seemed less immediate, less important. There was a moment, just a moment, where he thought he felt warmth. Not the harsh heat of the falling stones, but a gentle warmth, like sunlight through a window. Like Julia's hand in his, like the first loaves of bread coming out of the oven on a winter morning. His breathing slowed further. The pauses grew longer. Somewhere, beneath meters of ash and pumice, the city of Pompeii lay in ruins, the forum where people had gathered just that morning. The amphitheater where gladiators had fought, the temples where offerings had been made, the houses where families had lived and loved and argued and laughed. All of it buried, all of it silent. In his baccheri, the oven had long since gone cold. The fire that Quintus had lit that morning, that Marcus had tended throughout the day, had been smothered by falling debris. The flour sacks were buried. The kneading table was covered. The beautiful stone counter was invisible beneath layers of volcanic material. And upstairs, in the small room with the mosaic fish and the crack in the ceiling, Marcus took another breath. Then another. Each one slower. He thought of the dough he had kneaded that morning, how it felt beneath his hands. Elastic, alive in its way. rising slowly in the warmth, transforming from simple ingredients into something nourishing, something that sustained life. His whole life had been about sustaining life, feeding people, providing the daily bread that kept them going. Simple work, humble work, but necessary work. He thought of Quintus again, the quiet boy who watched and learned, who was learning to feel the dough, to understand the fire, to time the baking. Marcus hoped he had escaped, hoped he would remember what he had been taught, hoped he would make bread somewhere else, in some other city, and think occasionally of his old master. The darkness was complete now. No light penetrated the layers of ash that entombed the room, but Marcus's eyes were closed anyway, had been closed for some time. He didn't need to see. There was nothing to see. His hands rested at his sides, still hands. Hands that had kneaded thousands of loaves, hands that had held his wife, hands that had lit morning fires and counted coins and wiped flour from surfaces, hands that had built a life, simple and small, but his own. The ceiling crack was invisible in the darkness above him, but it was there. Patient, permanent, outlasting everything. Outlasting Marcus himself. Another breath. Shallower now, barely a movement of his chest. The ash settled over him like a blanket. Heavy, final, preserving. In, said his lungs, faintly. Out. In. A long pause. Out. Another pause. Longer this time. The city was silent. The mountain was silent. The world held its breath. In. The smallest movement. Out. And then... stillness. Complete stillness. Marcus Vesonius Primus, baker of Pompeii, who had risen with the sun for 46 or 47 years, who had made his bread and lived his quiet life, who had loved and lost and continued, who had looked at a ceiling crack every morning and found in it some small, constant comfort. Marcus slept, and this time he would not wake. The ash continued to fall outside, 4 hours more, covering everything, covering the bakery, the streets, the forum, the amphitheater, the temples, covering an entire city and all its stories. All its lives, all its small moments and grand ambitions and daily routines. Pompeii slept, and in a small room above a bakery, beneath meters of volcanic ash, a baker slept too, peacefully, finally, forever. Good night. Marcus, good night, Pompeii. Good night.